In recent days, we have seen some pretty heated remarks from the Liberal government after the Kinder Morgan announcement. These comments do not serve to unite. Instead, they are driving a wedge between Albertans and British Columbians. They're not helping the environment, the economy, or our federation. Let's be clear. Let's be absolutely clear. The Liberal government created this mess. If they had fulfilled their promise to overhaul the environmental review and the approval process, we would not be in this situation today. The Harper NEB approval process is widely seen as a sham, rigged towards oil and gas companies and against First Nations and Canadians. There are very few people outside the former Conservative government who believe the Harper process was legitimate. The Harper process refused to hear from many First Nations, also refused to hear some hard scientific evidence. The review even refused to hear evidence about the impacts of diluted bitumen oil spills. Canadians have real concerns. People along the coast are worried about what an oil spill would mean for their communities and their livelihoods. Canadians are concerned about the growing impacts of climate change. Indigenous communities, Indigenous peoples are deeply concerned about a government that continues to dismiss and ignore their land and their history, despite its recent commitment to a nation-to-nation relationship and to respect Indigenous rights. The Liberals agreed that the Harper process was rigged and unfair. But when they became government, they approved this pipeline through the flawed process created by Stephen Harper. They broke their promise. The Liberals were elected to change politics in Ottawa, to end the unilateral approach of the Conservatives, to work towards reconciliation with Indigenous peoples of this land and make decisions based on science. But now the federal government is threatening punitive and divisive sanctions against BC and First Nations, including cuts to healthcare transfers. Additionally, this government is threatening to use the Emergencies Act to override the legitimate concerns and force this project through no matter what. This is not what Canadians expected from this government or from this Prime Minister. This is not a path to reconciliation. This is not a science-based approach. This is not leadership. My approach is different. My approach is to always find ways to unite Canadians from all walks of life. Even in the situation we find ourselves today, there's still an option for this government. Are you going to work to unite Canadians or divide them for political gain? Instead of threats of force or accusing BC of ignoring the rule of law, which is completely untrue, let's look to how we can partner with each other, even if we disagree. Upholding the rule of law means respecting the Constitution, which includes federal and provincial jurisdiction, charter rights, and Aboriginal rights. There is a jurisdictional dispute in communities such as Burnaby and in various First Nations communities in British Columbia. This dispute must be resolved. The province of British Columbia has offered to work with the federal government to submit a reference case to the Supreme Court of Canada. This would provide much-needed clarity to all involved, and in fact, it's one of the primary functions of the Supreme Court throughout our history. That's why Canadians trust our top court, in fact, much more than they trust many other institutions. Today, we're calling on the federal government to partner with BC and to submit a joint reference question to the Supreme Court so that Canadians can see that politicians can actually work together for the national interest. We also urge them to invite First Nations and the province of Alberta to participate equally in this case. Let's use the resources we have. Let's use the institutions that we trust to move forward. Canadians want a strong economy, a healthy environment, clean air, and a bright future. It's going to take courage, it's going to take compassion, and maybe, yes, a little love for our fellow Canadians. But that's what Canadians want for ourselves and for our future. Thank you for being here. I've got some questions.
Mr. Singh, on average,
Rachel Notley about this.
It turns out that unfortunately, a Supreme Court reference will take time as well, and that there probably isn't going to be time to get that done in the 6-week window. So how do you deal with the Kinder Morgan timeline while still asking for the Supreme Court reference?
Well, right now, the British Columbia government has indicated that they're going to put forward a reference question to the Superior Court in British Columbia, which might be appealed to the British Columbia Court of Appeal and then appealed potentially to the Supreme Court of Canada. That is a much longer process. What we're proposing is a more streamlined process. If there is a joint question that the federal government signs on to as well, it will be given priority in the Supreme Court and actually will expedite the situation.
But still too long. Notley about this. Have you spoken to Premier Notley about your idea?
Our teams have been in constant communication. We've been in constant communication with both our teams in British Columbia and with Alberta, but I've not spoken with British Columbia.
But still, the reference takes on average 6 months. So how do you reconcile that with the delay of 6 weeks given by Kinder Morgan? Are you just killing the projects in practice?
Let's be clear. We're in this mess because of the Liberals. They're talking about putting punitive measures. They're threatening sanctions. They're threatening to cut healthcare transfers. That's not a way forward. A way forward is to sign on to a joint reference question. The way forward is to sign on to a joint reference question, which will expedite the current potential legal case, which will take much longer if it goes to the Provincial Superior Court and then to the Court of Appeal and then to the Supreme Court.
This is a way. Said 6 weeks. So
this is a way forward. Instead of threatening, instead of sanctioning, instead of using these sort of menacing acts, this is a way forward that actually unites instead of dividing. And that's what I believe in.
Will you kill the project?
Dans un contexte où l'entreprise Kinder Morgan a émis un délai vraiment clair, une date butoir du 31 mai, un renvoi à la Cour suprême, même si ce n'est pas à la Cour de la Colombie-Britannique, mais bien à la Cour suprême du Canada, prendrait probablement beaucoup plus de temps que ça. Alors, est-ce que ce n'est pas carrément décider de tuer d'une autre façon ce projet-là?
Maintenant, la situation, c'est le gouvernement de Colombie-Britannique va avoir une poursuite dans la Cour de justice en Colombie-Britannique. Ce qu'on propose, c'est une façon qui est plus efficace d'avoir une question qui est ensemble avec le gouvernement fédéral. La situation maintenant, le gâchis maintenant, c'est la faute du gouvernement fédéral, c'est clair. Mais on veut avoir un chemin à suivre qui peut unir les gens au lieu de diviser. Ce que le gouvernement a proposé, ce qu'il allait de faire, c'est de continuer cette division. Ça, c'est complètement inacceptable.
Mr. Singh, is it clear to you that the process forward would not kill this project? The one that you were suggesting, is it clear to you that the project could still go forward if the Supreme Court said yes? Or could it just die?
This is the more efficient way to move forward. This is a way that would respect the concerns of all people, and it is much more efficient than what would happen otherwise, which is British Columbia having to go to a court in British Columbia, then potential appeals, and then potentially to the Supreme Court. This is a way forward that is uniting people. This is a way forward that is more efficient and more, it's quicker. It's something that we've used a number of times in the history of our country to settle questions of jurisdiction.
Do you think this pipeline should be built? Yes or no? Do you think this pipeline should be built?
Well, I've made my opposition very clear based on the fact that the process didn't respect the concerns of Indigenous peoples, didn't respect the science and the scientific evidence. It wasn't an independent decision-based process. So I've made my concerns very clear. What I'm talking about today is a way forward that respects all people involved, that ensures that we don't go down the path of continuing division, which is what the Liberals are proposing, that doesn't go down a path of threatening to cut health transfers, that doesn't go down a path of that doesn't continue a conflict between Alberta and British Columbia. What I'm proposing is a path forward that is a path that actually allows people to come together.
Mr. Singh, he's about to be out of the country for 10 days. Do you think it's appropriate at this point in time, given the nature of the dispute, that the Prime Minister leaves the country for 10 days?
Well, this is absolutely something that's troubling. We've got a very serious issue. We've got the finance minister talking about cutting transfer payments to fund essential health services. This is a crisis which requires the Prime Minister to deal with. The mess is created by the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister absolutely has a responsibility to be here to ensure that this doesn't continue and to stop all sorts of language and discussion that's going to continue division. The Prime Minister should absolutely be here to deal with this crisis.